Friends, I'm going to ask everyone to please rise as the family enters. You may be seated. We're about to begin the services for Mrs. David. If any of you have a cell phone or any other type of noise-making device, I'd please ask you to turn it to the off position. Officiating our service here today will be Rabbi Herzl Hillel Yitzhak of the Sephardic congregation.
A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will feel no evil, for you are with me. Your rod, your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We're gathered here to pay respect to our dear Nagia David, Nagia Bat Gorgi. Nagia was born in Baghdad, Iraq in 1928 to Tzion and Gorgi Nawi. She was the eldest of 5 children. Nagia encompassed many roles. She was the beloved wife of the late Matana David, to whom she was married for 55 years. The loving mother of Doron and Miriam David, and Michelle and Randy Trubnick. She reveled in her grandchildren, Jeremy and Georgia, Daniel and Talia, Joey and Adina, and in her grandson, Noah Matan. Nagia grew up in a city with a rich Jewish history, which gave rise to many Torah scholars of magnificent stature. She would love to tell her grandchildren stories of what it was like growing up in Iraq and how the rabbi would come before Sukkot, house to house, to inspect each family's sukkah to make sure it was kosher. In the early 19th century, Baghdad had been reestablished as a leading Jewish center in the Middle East. There were about 6,000 Jewish families in the city, with many synagogues and strong community institutions. Baghdad gave rise to many great, influential, and renowned rabbis and Kabbalists, including Rabbi Yosef Chaim, also known as the Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Yehuda Ftaya, Rabbi Yitzchak Kaduri, and Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. Unfortunately, in 1941, during a period of political instability, a horrific pogrom in Baghdad was carried out where 179 Jews were killed, leaving 242 children as orphans. And with the establishment of the State of Israel in May 1948, Jewish persecution continued, and illegal immigration to Israel via Iran increased. Eventually, in 1950, Iraqi Jews were allowed to leave the country legally, provided they did so permanently within a year, and upon surrender of their Iraqi nationality. Each Jew was allowed 50 dinars and 30-pound baggage. Consequently, all valuables, including gold and jewelry, had to be left behind, and all assets of immigrating Jews were frozen. Overnight, nearly 80,000 Jews waiting to be airlifted to Israel were rendered penniless. It was at this time and under these conditions that Nagia and her family immigrated to Israel. Her suitcase may have held few material and worldly possessions, but she left Iraq with a wealth of Jewish knowledge, traditions, and values that she would subsequently transmit to her children and grandchildren. Nagia possessed a trait which is so rare and lacking in our generation that is best illustrated in the following anecdote. When she moved to Israel and lived in the Ma'abarot, immigrant tent cities, each day one can see immigrants lined up picking up the daily food rations. The people in the back of the line always asked those in the front of the line what food was being distributed that day. Some days the answer was potatoes. Other days the answer was 2 tomatoes and a small loaf of bread. Rather than being despondent, Nagia would exclaim, "Wow, 2 tomatoes and bread." She was so happy with her ration. This was part of her personality. It was a time in Israel's history when Israel could not absorb all the immigrants and the kibbutz could not keep up with sufficient food rations. Nevertheless, Nagia accepted whatever God dished out for her and her family, and she did not complain. Her profoundness was in her simplicity and in her modesty, both of which represented her essence. She had no sense of entitlement and no expectation that demanded the world to provide her with. The luxuries which she did cherish and which she passed down to her children and grandchildren were Jewish values, Jewish holidays, and Jewish education. She was immensely proud of her grandchildren in their education and in their embrace of Torah and mitzvot. Nagia loved the Sephardic congregation. Coming from Iraq to Israel to Chicago, the Sephardic congregation was a home away from home. Although interestingly, they almost did not become members. When Nagia and her husband first came to America, a friend of Matana, Dr. Shashua, suggested that they visit the Sephardic congregation, assuring him that they would certainly love the community and prayer services, and told him to look for the synagogue on Howard in California. At that time, there was a Jews for J establishment across the street from our synagogue, with a big Star of David on the front. Matana assumed this was the Sephardic congregation and proceeded to enter. Inside, he was greeted by the sight of the rabbi playing guitar on Shabbat, with a cross hanging behind him. Matana thought, wow, they sure do things differently here in America than in Israel. And he left quite disappointed. When Dr. Shashua saw Matana a few days later and asked him about his experience at the Sephardic congregation, Matana said, "It was terrible." Dr. Shashua was surprised. "What do you mean?" he asked. "The people there are so friendly." It was at that point that he realized he entered the wrong establishment. But when they figured out what corner of Howard we were on and came for a Shabbat service, they fell in love with our synagogue and found a place they called home. It was at the Sephardic congregation that Nagia established real, close, and lifelong friendships and relationships. She loved speaking with Marcel Levy, who called her all the time. She loved spending time with Angel Schreim and cherished her dearly. She considered Janet Mustaki as her own sister and treasured these friendships. In fact, she realized at the synagogue that she and her husband were related to Alfred Sayeg and his family, after which they celebrated many Jewish holidays together. Although towards the end of her life, Nagia experienced difficulty in her mobility, I think she traveled farther than many people without her limitations. She not only traversed 3 continents, but she journeyed a life full of purpose, a life full of meaning, and managed to successfully take the teachings of her parents and bequeath them to the next generation. She managed to take these teachings to a destination that spanned so many generations that even the greatest athlete without any mobility issues could not have managed that feat. Towards the end of her life, she may not have been able to walk very far, but her legacy and values traveled oh so far. And she would always exclaim that her parents and her grandparents would be very proud to see her grandchildren in their embrace of Torah and Judaism. And that is far. Nagia is no longer with us. She has left those of us who grieve her passing with the memories she gave and the good that she did. May God bless Nagia and her. May she rest in eternal peace. Amen. I would like to now call upon Michelle Trubnik.
My mom, Nagia David, was born in Baghdad in 1928, the oldest of 5 children. Her siblings were Meir, Giula, Yehuda, and Miriam. She was born at a time of tranquility in Baghdad where Jews had a rich history since Babylonian times. Baghdad was one of the oldest Jewish communities in the world with many of the greatest Torah scholars. My mom had a warm childhood growing up in such a large and extended family, with so many cousins and so many fond memories of Baghdad. She always lit up talking about the holidays there, her very large family, her parents, her school, the friends, the community. She loved the ethnic food, the songs, the culture, and how warm everybody was to each other. Upon the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, Jews who were at home for thousands of years were immediately deemed traitors. By 1950, they were asked to leave the country with no possessions of value and could only take a small bag with them. My mom always told me about the jewelers that would sew gold into the soles of shoes and the small jewelry that people carried out in their undergarments, as my mom did as well. Most of the community of 150,000 Jews left for Israel on a moment's notice. In Israel, my mom was in a development town, which were glorified tents at the time, as the country was so small to absorb so quickly all these new immigrants. My father was also from Baghdad, but my parents did not know each other in Iraq, but the families knew each other. One day, my father came to my mother's house and asked my Saba, "I understand you have a young lady of marrying age here." My Saba said yes, and they met and eventually married in 1954. They lived in Ramat Gan and were very happy. They had 2 children, Doron and myself. My mother suffered a catastrophic loss in 1967 when she was picking up my brother at the bus and was told that her younger brother, Yehuda, who was recently married, was killed in the 6-day war. Life was very hard in Israel, and my father was working at a company that was transferring to the United States. He took advantage of the opportunity to make a better life and moved to Chicago. We moved here in 1968. We grew up in Rogers Park and then in 1973 moved to Des Plaines. My mother's hobbies were Sephardic cooking, sewing, and she wrote so many letters on aerograms that I was shocked at how many words could fit on the borders. My cousins in Israel said they loved getting letters from Doda Nagia, as they always had such great stories and pictures. As I said, my mom loved cooking, and I do not remember any takeout or ever eating in a restaurant. She made every meal from scratch with love and flavor. She loved going to the Sephardic congregation in Chicago, where she would meet other Jews from the Middle East, and they would all reminisce about their earlier days, their common shared history and language. She loved when the grandchildren started coming, making them Sephardic baked items and coming over to babysit, singing songs and just playing. She sang Arabic and Hebrew songs to them. She was thrilled when I married into the Trebnik Pagonitz family. She and Frida, Zachor Lebracha, became friends, and my parents were always welcomed into their homes at Chagim or all life cycle events. Without fail, she came every Friday night for Shabbat dinner for so many years. I have gratitude to my friends who always, upon inviting me for Friday night, often included my mother as well. You all opened up your homes, your hearts, and she enjoyed meeting the wonderful community that I had become part of. She loved going to Hillel Torah for Grandparents' Day or the various presentations over the years. She was proud of the kids growing up, learning Hebrew and their Torah values. She always told me how proud her parents would have been of my children. I thank God for granting my mom long life. She lived in 3 countries, spoke many languages, met so many friends along the way. In 1950, when she moved to Israel, she could have never dreamed it would be the country it is today. She had so many good times and so many good memories. Even though it lacked the numerous restaurants and museums of today, it was a much simpler time. She cherished the huge extended family in Ramat Gan, in Or Yehuda, and Holon. She loved the Jewish holidays and was very proud that I set up a kosher home and kept the tradition of the Jewish holidays. Unfortunately, my mom had hardships too, physical and emotional. Mom, at the end, getting around was very hard. Even easy walks from the living room to the kitchen or the bathroom were very labored. She always had strength and persevered. The dementia took a toll on her as she forgot simple things and had such a hard time remembering people and recent events. Although I do confess that for the last 2 years, with COVID news 24/7, all the new rules and the variants and the stress, at times I was actually grateful that she was spared all of that anxiety. Months ago, my mom got the special news that she would be a Sapta Rabbah. She was very excited each time I told her, as dementia allows for new excitement for already shared news. Each time her face lit up, and she was so happy this baby would be a Sabra, as her children were. Even more touching that the baby was named for my father, her husband, Matan, for Matana, which means gift. She was very proud of Jeremy marrying and living in Israel. She looked forward to your visits. She loved Georgia and was stunned to learn that the Hebrew spelling of Georgia was the same as her mother, Gergii. Jeremy's nickname for her when he was little was Rara, and that continues to this day. Daniel, you had a way to make her laugh and sing in Arabic, and you made her do and say very silly things. She was very excited to meet Talia and thrilled to be at your wedding in Dallas. She loved the kallas that my boys had chosen and was thrilled about the growing family. She was always so proud of Joey, even though he remained 10 years old, no matter how old he actually was. Joey, she was so proud of all your achievements and so happy to meet Eliza. Adina, you were the special princess, and Sapta was so proud of you. You would sit with her and you created your own special bond. You treated her with patience, empathy, and grace. During the last few years, it was getting more difficult for her to come with her more labored mobility and the COVID fears. I brought the holidays to her. She would make the brachot for Tu B'Shvat, for Pesach, for Rosh Hashanah. I often brought my work to her and would keep her company while I tended to my tasks of the day. I visited her very often and was blessed to live so close. As I was driving to the hospital this week, I was listening to a shir on Tu B'Shvat, the holiday which coincidentally is today. I remember last year Tu B'Shvat, bringing you all the grains and the fruits to my mom to say the brachot. Last year when I told my mom it was Tu B'Shvat, she looked out the window in shock as there was so much snow She thought I was mistaken. She said in a very slang Arabic that the trees were lost and would not arrive. The rabbi on the shiur was from Canada, and he talked about how the holiday of trees and the new fruits came at a time of so much snow that thinking about a tree or a flower blossoming underneath seems out of place. However, the buds underneath the snow are indeed preparing for spring. Eventually, the snow melts, and the flowers inside come out and beautify the world. Mom, you lived 93 years, you worked hard, you played hard, and now you have earned your rest. I pray that you are at peace, and the next generation that comes will beautify our family, and you could look down and smile at all the fruits that you and my father have planted. I would like to express gratitude for my mother's beloved caregiver and best friend, Rosita Pierre. You took care of her with such love, patience, and tenderness. You learned a lot of Arabic and Hebrew along the way. You learned about our Jewish traditions and learned how to cope with my mother's increasing loss of memory and mobility. I know she was very, very difficult at times, but I know you know how much she loved you and how grateful we all were to have you. Mom, I ask Mechila from you. I only tried to make your years on this earth easier and happy. I will miss our almost daily visits. I pray you are at peace and can look down happily upon all of us.
I'd like to call upon Doron, David.
I will remember my mother, Nagia, as a devoted, committed mother to Michelle and myself. My mother derived pleasure from giving to others and loved her family. Whenever I came to Chicago to see the family, my mother always went out of her way to host me and cook her authentic Iraqi homemade dishes no matter how she was feeling physically. My mother taught me what it means to be a true giver, and I hope to continue her legacy of giving, as my father was named Matana and I was named Doron, which also means gift. 2.5 years ago, she came to Dallas for Daniel and Talia's wedding. She had a nice time with my close friends and the rabbi's family there, and I knew it was a special time. It was also the last visit. It was the last time she can travel. Although the last few years were difficult for my mother and I to see each other, she was delighted to hear that I got married a couple of years ago. I am grateful that she met my wife, Maribel, last summer and immediately connected with her. Mom, I love you so much, and I ask for mechila from you for any times I may have upset you. May you rest in peace.
Representing the grandchildren, I want to call upon Daniel Trubnik.
When I was in high school, I was given an assignment to interview someone and write a biography paper about them. Although I knew in my gut that my Savta was the obvious choice, I was a little skeptical at first that she'd be able to understand my questions and remember enough about her past in order to conduct a successful interview. I ultimately decided that I should choose to interview my Savta for this project because I knew she had a very interesting past, and I also knew that I did not know nearly enough about it. I remember interviewing her and being genuinely surprised at the details she remembered from the past 60 years of her life. A few highlights I learned was that Savta was kicked out of Iraq and moved to Israel in 1951 with just her brother, and that she spent the next 17 years farming in Israel and working hard to develop the country. As many of you know, Savta was diagnosed with dementia in 2014 and gradually lost many of her cognitive abilities, which made communicating with her a little more difficult. What this interview taught me was that while having intelligent conversations and a strong relationship with my Savta was not as easy as a typical grandchild-grandmother relationship, it was definitely possible. For as long as I can remember, Savta would come to our house pretty frequently, usually on Friday nights. If you didn't actively engage her in conversation, she could end up sitting with us the whole night and not saying a word, just doing her normal scans around the room. I'm not sure if it was exactly around the time that I wrote this biography report about her, but I think we can all agree that a few years ago, something changed about our Friday nights with Savta. Instead of having typical Friday night conversations with the six of us, or whoever in our immediate family was home that weekend, we all started to actively engage her more and more until the point where she was the center point of most of the conversations. When I think about Savta, I think about all of these amazing Friday nights we had with her. It would start with my dad wheeling her into the house and everyone yelling to each other that Savta is here and making her grand entrance, as we called it. When she would get to the front door, Joey and I would cheer her in and wave her into the house like a third base coach sending the runner on third to home. A few of our favorite memories from those meals are when Adina and I would fake fall asleep at the table so Savta would see us and then sing her Hebrew lullaby, Numi Numi, to us, when I would lightly kick her feet under the table and she would try to convince me that a cat was running around under the table, when we would ask her to predict our futures by reading the lines on our hand, a real talent of hers, and Georgia and I's favorite, when we would out of nowhere just start listing Iraqi foods to her and she would always join in. Because my Savta's teeth were not strong enough to handle much other than meatballs, my mom made her meatballs every Friday night, and Savta always compared them to bamia, her favorite Iraqi food. I feel very grateful that my Savta was able to attend Talia and I's engagement party, Talia's wedding shower, and ultimately fly to Dallas for our wedding. When I watch my wedding video, I can't help but notice how big of a smile she had while sitting at the Bedeka next to my mom and while being wheeled down the aisle by Joey. I'll always remember that she was sitting right next to me and Talia while our friends and family did their shtick at the end of the first dance. I owe a huge thanks to my mom for handling all the logistics to make this happen, and I can speak on behalf of all my siblings that we all admire you, the devotion you always had to your mother. A few weeks ago, Jeremy and Georgia had a baby boy named Noah Mason, who was named after my Saba. Although I was not expecting them to name the baby after Saba, I loved the reasoning for the name. My Saba spent 17 years working hard to physically develop the country and was a proud Zionist. He would love to know that his first great-grandchild was born in Israel and named after him. I think there is meaning in the fact that Noah Mason, named after my Saba, was born just weeks before the passing of my Savta. Although she never got to meet baby Noah, I take comfort in the fact that she is now watching over him and now can truly appreciate the incredible country that he was born in and that she worked to develop. Savta, when I think of you, it puts a smile on my face. We love you and will miss you dearly. Please know that we only have the best memories of you. Hashem Natan v'Hashem Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach Me'atav Yad Olam.
Please rise.
צדיק אתה אדוני וישר משפטיך, צדיק אדוני בכל דרכיו וחסיד בכל מעשיו, צדקתך צדק לעולם ותורתך אמת, משפטי אדוני אמת צדקו יחדיו, באשר דבר מלך שלטון ומי יאמר לו מה תעשה, והוא ואחד ומי ישיבנו ונפשו עיוותה ויעש, הצור תמים פועלו ככל דרכיו משפט, אל אמונה ואין עוול, צדיק וישר הוא. דיין האמת, שופט צדק ואמת, ברוך דיין האמת, ככל משפטיו צדק ואמת. המרחם על כל בריאותיו, הוא יחוס ויחמול וירחם על נפש, רוח ונשמה של נג'יה בת גורג'י, רוח אדוני תניחנה בגן עדן, היא וכל בני ישראל השוכבים עמה, בכלל הרחמים והסליחות, וכן יהי רצון ונאמר Amen. Let God remember the soul of Nagia David, Nagia Bat Gorgi, who went to her place of eternal rest. Please let her soul be bound up with living in the continuum of life, and may her rest be honorable. Grant her abundant joy in your presence and sweet pleasures at your right hand for eternity. Amen. God, who is filled with mercy, dwelling in the heavens' heights, grant perfect peace beneath the wings of your divine presence, amid the ranks of the holy and the pure, illuminating like the brilliance of the skies the souls of our beloved and our blameless who went to their eternal place of rest. May you, who are the source of mercy, shelter them beneath your wings eternally, and bind their souls among the living, that they may rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
May be seated. This concludes our service here in the chapel. The interment will take place at Silverman and Wife's section of Waldheim Cemetery immediately following this service. The family will be accepting Shiva calls 847-363-4743. It's located on your folder. For those of you who are on the live stream, it's also located on our website. Please note that the family has asked that memorial contributions be made to the Sephardic congregation, and that information is also located on your folders. For those of you who will be going in procession with the family to the cemetery, please make sure you obtain an orange funeral safety sticker. That sticker should be placed in the front passenger side of your windshield. We would also ask that you have your bright headlights and flashing hazard lights on at all times. For an additional measure of safety, our staff will be placing magnetic flags on a number of the vehicles throughout the procession. As we drive in procession today, please drive as close as safety permits to the vehicle in front of you. We want to avoid any large gaps or spaces, especially as we go through the intersections. I would ask you to please think carefully about not utilizing your cell phone as you drive. At this time, I'm going to ask the pallbearers to please step forward. I would ask everyone else to rise as the family, as Mrs. David and the clergy escorted from the sanctuary.